Welcome to Proud Product Peeps. Today, my guest is Ron Severdia, a design leader and author. We talk about everything from his dinner with Martha Stewart to what makes him most proud, building products that makes people's lives easier. I have a story where I think I might have made you very upset, and I am so curious about the other side of the stories. As I go through these podcasts, I have these different recollections, and obviously the other person's side is slightly different. But we had a team meeting in London a few years ago. We had dinner in the Oxo Tower, and there was like 30 of us. I think we had 2 or 3 pretty big tables. We sat next to each other, and I gave you the right to choose and select the wine for everybody, since you're an amazing wine connoisseur. So they brought over the different wine. We had a great red at our table. You might even remember the wine. And at the end, towards the end of the dinner, I ordered a Diet Coke. I looked at you and I poured the Diet Coke into the wine. And you were so offended, you got up and you went and sat at another table. And by the way, I was in Switzerland with my family earlier this year, and that's actually a drink that they serve, Coke and red wine. But what's your version of the story? Were you actually upset or were you being dramatic?
Well, so I know you describe me as a wine connoisseur, and I'm not a professional sommelier. Let's just say that, but I have had my fair share of wine over the years, and I do live in Northern California, right next to Napa. So we have I have a lifelong exposure and influence of some of the best wines in the world. And so one of my favorite movies is Sideways. And I have to say that there are some elements of the main character in there that I do identify with, as far as like how wine should be drunk. Maybe not to the extreme that he was, but yeah, I remember that dinner. I remember ordering the wine. I remember you pouring the Coke in there. Now, to be fair, like, to each his own, right? I don't care how anybody drinks their wine, white wine, red wine, rosé wine, or whatever. But no, obviously I wasn't viscerally offended or anything by what you did. I didn't really care, but it kind of makes for a funny story, doesn't it? And so I lived for some time in Europe, and so I've seen the Coke, maybe not Diet. I think it was Diet Coke that you put in there.
Diet Coke, yes.
I haven't seen the Diet Coke and red wine, but I have seen the Coke and red wine with ice as a drink, as a thing in Germany and Czech Republic and other places too. So it wasn't a necessarily new thing. But hey, to each his own. And I figured in the situation, it made for a funny funny story.
I mean, it tasted like cherry Coke. It was actually pretty good. I actually came home and had my wife. I'm like, you got to try this. It was actually good. But I do remember like purposely trying to antagonize you, because I kept asking you, isn't rosé just red and white wine together? And I was pretending to pour both of them in, and you're like, no. And so I think I was like, okay, it was like a little brother, big brother thing, where it was like, how can I antagonize him more? That it was the Diet Coke scenario.
Yeah. So basically, you and I were like the two guys in Sideways. We were on a wine tour, and you were the guy who was just like chewing bubble gum while drinking his wine.
That's a good idea. I'll try bubble gum with Diet Coke and red wine and see how that goes going forward.
Report back on that, Justin. That goes for you.
I will. So you go from that dinner, and then I know you had a pretty interesting dinner experience with Martha Stewart once. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. This was about a year ago. I went to India for a few weeks, and I was traveling around India, and I sum up my Indian experience as the people were nice, the food was very good, and the traffic was horrible. And on my very last day, I decide I'm going to check into the Taj Palace Hotel in Bombay, or Mumbai, depending upon which you prefer. And that's my last night there. I'm going to see Bombay, and I'm going to go around and have the experience. I asked the concierge, where can I eat? And he's like, well, there's Italian, there's this or that. And he says, there, Morimoto, Iron Chef Morimoto has a sushi restaurant in the Taj Palace Hotel. I'm like, sushi? That sounds great. It's a little bit of a break from the Indian food for a couple of weeks. That's great. I'm on my way home. He says, all right, I'll book you a seat at the counter. I get in there. I sit at the counter. 10 minutes later, Martha Stewart walks in to Morimoto's sushi restaurant in Bombay and sits right next to me at the counter. She was with her friend there who stayed for a little bit, but then he eventually
Not Snoop Dogg, not
no,
that friend.
no. He's a guy that works for her. And so basically, she and I chatted for like an hour. We talked about like TV shows and Shakespeare and just, all kinds of stuff. I think she might have been afraid I was going to answer some questions she didn't want to answer. But it was actually really great. We just sat there and had sake, and, the chefs just come out bringing more and more food for us. She told me a story about Chef Morimoto that I won't repeat because it's not very flattering. But, she it was great. I mean, it was just her and I just like chit chatting for a while. And I told my wife, I said, I was texting my wife and I said, you don't believe who I'm having dinner with right now. And she said, who? And I said, Martha Stewart. And she said, are you drunk? Or is it 420 in India or something like that? Right. She was, so I leaned over to Martha and said, Martha, she's never going to believe me that I'm sitting here having dinner with you. Can we do a selfie? So we did some crazy selfies together. I won't make those public either, but yeah, it was a really great time. And she after a few drinks, she just said, time to go to bed, and said, all right, see ya. So she was apparently in India visiting her factory where they make something like 300,000 towels a day for her Martha
Oh
Stewart
wow.
line of products. So she was traveling around India for that business purpose, and we just happened to meet up in a sushi bar in Bombay.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. And she sounds pretty down to earth too, which is always a question of, the situation and, come across somebody, but that sounds like a great experience.
Yeah, I had heard that she wanted to buy a house in the Bay Area, and there were some people in that area that didn't want a celebrity to move in, and may have been some protests or something. It was all gossip I had heard, and so I asked her. I said, "Did you want to buy a house in the San Francisco Bay Area?" And she's like, "Oh God, no! I'm an East Coast gal."
Yeah, I
Um,
think I mentioned I grew up in the town that she lives. I think she still lives
yeah,
there, Westport, Connecticut, and we never really saw her when I was growing
yeah,
up. But yeah, she was definitely always in that East Coast area, except for one few year part of her life where she was in a different area when she got in trouble. But are you? So it's interesting that you said you took selfies. I always wonder, about folks when they see somebody that maybe wasn't on their bingo card of meeting and like gawking at or whatever. If you hadn't talked to her and you saw her just at a table next to you, are you a selfie guy, like, hey, let me go and take a selfie, ask this person to take a selfie, or do you generally leave them alone?
I generally leave them alone. I feel bad because I don't want to disrupt. If they're already getting attention and they're not enjoying a private moment with somebody or something like that, then maybe it's a little bit easier to ask because there's five other people asking or whatever, or if they're more willing. But I don't like in George Lucas lives down the street from me, and so I see him. There's a cafe down the street. I see him there every so often, and I try to be cool about it. I maybe will take a little photo of him, secretly, just but the kids that are in the cafe, they recognize him like little kids. Like, oh, it's George Lucas, George Lucas, so I try to be cool about it. Or if the situation's right, maybe I'll ask. But I also have to be really like overwhelmed, wowed
Right.
that this person is in the room too. So
Yeah, I can't think of anybody that would fit into that category for me where I'd be like, I have to. I usually say something sarcastic, witty, stupid. Or when my son was younger, I would always have him say something. And I
Yeah.
would never ask, I very rarely, if ever, ask for, autograph. I can't, unless the situation is specifically for an autograph or a selfie or whatever. Usually if like in the background you take like a selfie or whatever and they see
Yeah.
them, but
Yeah.
I'm with you that like I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to impact their them eating or whatever. I just usually say something in my mind witty, in everybody else's mind stupid. So
Yeah, and I should say also that there's another case where Sean Penn used to live near me as well, and when he was married to Robin Wright, and I saw the two of them in another sushi restaurant, ironically, around here, and I felt like, oh my god, it's the two of them. They're both like big time movie stars, and but knowing Sean Penn's history of addressing people who take photographs of him when he doesn't want them to,
right, yes.
I figured, that's an extra reason why I wouldn't want to approach him. But yeah,
I wasn't meaning it to go this way, but I live in the Charlotte area, and we see so many professional athletes, like current and past. My son and I were at a movie theater a few years ago, probably like 2019 or something, and we were in line for popcorn or whatever. And in front of us, there was this dad and son, and the son had like a flag football shirt on, and it said Murrell, Murrell. And I lean over to my son and I go, oh my gosh, that was my favorite New York Jet when I was growing up. He was a running back. And the guy turns around, he goes, that's me. I'm like, no way. And so it was, I didn't like ask for anything or like get a photo or anything like that. But it is, those types of situations, like you have more of a memory of it than anything else. Right. So,
yeah, yeah,
so yeah.
Strange coincidences.
Yes, exactly. So the purpose of this podcast is to talk about what makes each of us proud. Just curious, you've accomplished a lot in your career, and what has made you the most proud? An achievement, some goal that you achieved, a job, any of the above, or anything else. What's made you most proud in your career?
Gosh, it's hard to say that there's one specific thing or one big thing. It's usually a lot of smaller things. And I don't know why. Maybe that relates to my strengths finders, which is another conversation. But I I guess I feel proud when I know that someone of discerning taste or critical opinions gives me a compliment or says this was something that was, something that made their life somehow better or easier. Maybe as a customer or a user of a product that I've worked on. And so I guess I like a lot of those sort of micro moments add up to being something that proud of something that me and my team have built. So at Optimizely, we maybe another example of this is before I met you. We had a chat. We had three products essentially at the Optimizely one in the earlier days, and our customers would start using one product, which had a lower barrier to entry. And then when they became more sophisticated, they would start to use another product, which was called Full Stack. And when they switched from one product to the other one, that was usually a big jump for them to do that. And so me and my team was challenged with trying to figure out a way to solve that and solve some of the other problems. And so we got together and we did essentially sort of a design incubator process for a few weeks. And, through that process, we figured out technical hurdles and how we can migrate customers and how do we merge the products into this new user experience. And what we came up with was leapfrogging what was simply just merging the products together or trying to figure out a migration path. So I would say this new sort of full stack experience that we came up with that's now in use by Optimizely unlocked capabilities that weren't previously possible. So in situations where you're not only solving that problem, but also doing that sort of that quantum leap style jump into a new approach and then see that to come to fruition, that's a particularly proud moment.
So the creation of something that concludes in something exceptionally valuable that helps businesses or individuals achieve their goals. Yeah.
Exactly. And seeing that come to fruition, and then seeing the a validation after that, that like, yes, this is not only achieve what we needed to solve, but you've already thought several steps ahead and solve the next things that we're focusing on.
We were talking earlier about the faster horse versus the car. I think that that scenario fits
Yeah.
very well, right? So you always help showed me the fact that yes, we're getting feedback from customers. We're going through a very, in some cases, rigorous process to understand how they operate, how they use the product, and all that stuff. But just because a customer or an individual who uses the product says, "I want this next step to be X," doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you should do. It's an input method. So maybe talk a little bit more even about that whole process of how you're not just focused on making the faster horse, but you're thinking of brand new ways to achieve the end goals that the customers have.
Yeah. The worst cycle that you can fall into as a product team or as a designer is doing exactly what the customer asks for. Customer says, I want a button here that does this. And then you go and you add a button there that does that. I think a better way is doing deeper discovery and better understanding why they want that, what is the need for that, and how can I anticipate several steps ahead of that. And then take sort of a witch's cauldron, if you will, of those kinds of needs, and figure out how you can take that need that you've uncovered under the customer saying, I want a button here, that need with all the other needs that your customers are expressing. And maybe there is a sort of a Vulcan mind meld type thing that happens when you combine two or more needs together, and they're related, or maybe they're not related in some way, to come up with what is the next idea to sort of help leapfrog that. So you can't just sort of literally follow that one path, but it's difficult because you're keeping a lot of things in your mind and you're trying to juggle a lot of different balls. And so you can figure out the pattern of juggling that is, okay, here's the new way to do it based on the synthesis, for lack of a better word, of the problems and needs, to sort of jump ahead and say, okay, this is what I think we're going to need next. And then, this is the thread we're going to pull at to determine, how we're going to sort of jump ahead.
So witches and Vulcan grips, like I get it, like good visual. Would you, can you say that what you do from a design UX perspective is more science, more art? And let's pretend you can't say it's exactly 50-50 of each.
No, I don't think it's ever 50-50 each. I think it's a pendulum that goes both ways. I think both ingredients are necessary, but I don't think in equal parts. I don't think that's realistic in equal parts. I think you can make an assumption that the science part of it is going to be the majority of this. Maybe it's a scientific product. Maybe it's there's another reason for that, but you follow down the path in a certain way. The pendulum can swing all the way to the other side. So it could be 80-20 in one way and swing to 80-20 in the opposite way. But I think both are necessary ingredients.
Now, so I think it's interesting, Optimizely, the OG Optimizely of experimentation is all about the hypothesis, right? Like or starting, not all about having a hypothesis and trying to, figure out if that was accurate and then coming up with new ones and all that stuff. When you go into these situations and you go and look to redesign, let's say, a process, do you have a hypothesis what you're starting out with those assumptions that you're saying, hey, we're going to prove this or disprove it, versus do you let the data drive you to the end result?
The data creates the hypothesis, in my opinion. So data will inform a hypothesis, and that's part of the sort of the scientific method, sort of infinite circle there. So come up with a hypothesis, prove or disprove that, and then come up with another one, disprove or disprove that. So basically, that's sort of feedback loop, and you spin out of that when you have something that you um, that resonates with your customers or solves problems for your customers.
So I think that the data, most people think, oh, I don't have the data, so how do I come up with a hypothesis? To me, almost like experience is the data. Your past experiences is the data. You might not have the data that leads into that conversation initially. So I do think that your experience drives the hypothesis. All of our experiences drive the hypothesis. And then you have legitimate data, telemetry, and other things that help drive to that point. Because if you needed data for everything to begin before you have the hypothesis, some people may never be able to get started because there's no historical data.
Right. But I'll turn that around on you. How do you define data?
Well, I mean, different inputs of, telemetry could be one. It could be interviews, certainly with the customers. It could be seeing how they, you're doing side by sides, or in the call center world, double jack, where you're seeing that. All those are inputs, interviews, different things like that. But those are still very subjective oriented. To me, like real data that occurs after the hypothesis for you to prove it is the objective, real data that's binary, yes or no type of things. Maybe not always, but so I think like that's where I see people struggle of they don't have a hypothesis early enough to then go and figure out what they need to do to disprove or prove that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need numbers data to create a hypothesis.
Yep.
It is
Yes.
one form of data to be able to create that. The most important thing is creating a good hypothesis, because there are a lot of really crappy hypotheses out there, and that just leads to a crappy outcome on that. And then you have not solved or learned anything. You want to at least learn something in that from that
Yep.
hypothesis. And if you don't formulate that in the right way, you're wasting time. So what data do you have? Whether that is, hey, I have, in my experience, I've dealt with 20 customers that have this problem, and 19 out of those 20 times I have solved it this way. My hypothesis is, and it's a pretty strong one, that if we solve it in this way, it's going to solve it for the 21st customer.
Yep. Yep.
And let's test that hypothesis.
This seems like a conversation we had a few years ago. Shout out to Kevin Lee, hypothesis generator, which were like, this is what we think we should do. We think we need to help generate the hypothesis. And there was major arguments about like, is that the cart before the horse, chicken or egg? And I still see it. Like I operate differently now after being a part of the experimentation part of Optimizely, the importance of the hypothesis. Because I think we all grew up that says, don't have an opinion until you see the data. And I think that hypothesis, the opinion, is important because there could potentially be so much data that you're just drowned in it. You don't know what to do with it. So like, how are you litmus testing that? And that's where the hypothesis comes in. But I think some of this is like, you brought up strength finders. Huge fan of strength finders, Clifton Strengths. Your top three strengths, according to Clifton Strengths, strategic, intellection, and significance. And I think that, maybe talk a little bit about your interpretation of intellection and significance, because I think it's related to some of the things that you were actually just talking about.
Yeah. So I took strength finders twice, about 5 years in between each of those tests.
Did the first time say you didn't have any? Because they usually don't say that. I'm joking.
Yeah, it just said, "Why are you taking this?"
Try again. Page 404.
In a few years. Yeah, you're hopeless. You have no strengths. Yeah, it was actually very similar. It changed a little bit, but not much. Intellection was an interesting one for me because I've always felt like I've been an intellectual person. I mean, as a kid growing up, I was reading a lot of books, and I skipped a grade. When I was in first grade, they moved me up to second grade because I was bored and, doing everything. So, and then I went to college while I was in high school. So I ended up getting 2 years off of my scholastic sentence, so to speak. Normally you graduate when you're 18. I graduated from high school when I was 16. And so, because I had skipped 2 grades over the time I was there. And so I always kind of knew that I was intellectual, brainy, other kids call you that too when you're growing up. So, they're merciless. And so that was always sort of part of my history and part of my background. So seeing that on the results was not too much of a surprise, but I wanted to know like, like, what does that actually mean in the context of Strength Finders? And um, one of the things it said was that you're at your best when you have the time to follow an intellectual trail and see where it leads. And I think there's a relation to
I
that.
mean, your remit and your experience and the job that you have, like I couldn't think of almost any better word of the 36 that Clifton has that they come up with than that. That's exactly like what you do on a daily basis, I thought.
Yeah, yeah. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like what I was talking about before, sort of pulling at a thread and see like
Yeah.
how this happens. And then another part of that is the ability to encourage other people around you to use their sort of their full intellectual capital. And that's done by a few things. That's like reframing questions for them, engaging them in dialogue. And then, sort of the flip side of that is that might be realizing that might be intimidating for people. And a lot of people need time to reflect on that. Whereas the person who has intellection as a higher strength usually thinks faster. So one of the things that I'm saying is usually you think faster than other people, and therefore you jump to a solution faster than other people normally do. You have to take the time to take them on the journey, to lead
Yep.
them through the same, show your math, show your long division math, to take them on the same journey to the same solution, so that they just don't think that you are making a snap judgment, uninformed judgment, or you're shooting from the hip, or whatever. That you actually have worked it out just faster than they have, and you need to sort of talk through it with people that don't think in that way.
And then what was the definition of significance from Clifton? Do you have that up?
That was
Because I think that's directly related, from what I recall of the definition, it's directly related to what you're proud of, the compliments, achieving, having importance in somebody else's life because you help them. I think that there is a direct correlation to that, if I recall.
yeah. You will perform best when your performance is visible. Look for opportunities that put you on center stage. Stay away from roles that hide you behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Choose jobs or positions that you can determine your own tasks and actions. You enjoy the exposure that comes with independence.
So we didn't talk about what you're most proud of, but in advance of this, right when you talked about what it was, literal significant. I mean, like, I don't think there could be anything even more correlated than what we were just talking about, from an intellection perspective, and how you think. And this is the importance of doubling, tripling down on strengths, right? Like, if I know you have a strength of significance, it is up to me as a manager, let's say, to put you in that situation to help make sure that it's not about accolades. I don't think it's not about pats on the back necessarily. It's literally about articulating what you want to articulate that you think is offering value. And I think putting people in their positions of strength, I mean, it couldn't be, more obvious. I think it took us a year, year and a half to really align around that. And then I think it clicked for me that those were important things that you needed, and that then, can help accelerate what we were collectively trying to do. So
Yeah.
tripling down on strengths is, critically important. So.
Yeah. And I remember one of those conversations, and I don't know if you remember this or not, where we were talking about an initiative that was important. And I felt like I went to that one-on-one with you going like, okay, I'm going to have to like lay out my case here for doing this. And so I did that. And your response was, I trust you. And that was it. And I was like, come on, you gotta give me some more resistance here. You gotta,
Yeah, you're prepared for it.
And so that, and that happened more than once. So, but that first time, I just remember, that moment and thinking like, okay, great. That, it doesn't mean I go rogue or anything at this point. It just means that like there's somebody that has my back, that understands that I've got a good head on my shoulder, a reasonably good head on my shoulders, and so I have the best interests of of our customers and the company and the business and the goals in mind. And I say Claire Vaux, the former chief product officer at Optimizely. I worked with her for a few years before the acquisition. A similar conversation with her. I laid something out for her, presented my case, and I remember her saying, "Are you sure you want to die on this hill? Because if you do, I'll go to bat for you."
Yeah, yeah. What somebody's passionate about. That's a great way to put it. Like, yeah, if you're not willing to die on this hill, like, why am I going to go through this exercise? Then, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So if it's
So,
important enough, then I'll support you in that endeavor, because I think it also, I may not see the whole picture, may or may not, but I understand this is how this fits into the puzzle of how we get to where we need to go.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to get into the part where I'm going to ask you a few true or false questions about San Francisco. It's
Okay.
around where you're from, but you agreed that we would focus on San Francisco.
Yeah.
So, true or false to these questions? All right, first one. Golden Gate Park is bigger than Central Park from an acres perspective.
Uh, I think that's true, actually.
It is true. Golden Gate Park is 1,017 acres, and Central Park in New York City is 778 acres.
Yeah.
You have one correct. All right. The Chinese fortune cookie was invented in San Francisco.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, in the 1890s.
I have been to that factory. The factory is still alive here in Chinatown.
Well, that's pretty cool.
And they are the OG. And you can make your own fortune cookie there and put your own fortune in it.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Alcatraz has always been a prison.
No, I don't think so. It was, I don't remember what it was before, but I don't think it was a prison before.
It is false. Military. There was a military fort.
Yeah.
Golden Gate Bridge was always meant to be red/orange, as in that was the original design.
No, it wasn't. And it's International Safety Orange, is I believe what the orange is called.
So
Is the
it
name.
was not. It was originally supposed to be black and golden, and the guy who created the bridge convinced the city to make it red orange because it would be more memorable. Sea
And,
lions.
and my grandmother and her sister were the first ones to cross the Golden Gate Bridge on the day it opened in
Wow.
1937. They
Wow.
roller skated across just as the mayor cut the ribbon. And so there's a photo of them on the front page of the San Francisco Examiner, roller skating across. And she tells about, like, yeah, there was guys on stilts and all kinds of stuff. But that was her big claim to fame. And every time there was an
Wow, that's pretty
anniversary,
cool.
they would call her.
Wow, you are really throwing it back on me a couple of times today. That is true. Last one, you're 4 for 4. Very good. Last one, sea lions on what is that, Pier 39?
Yep.
Arrived in 1989 after the earthquake.
I think they were there before that. I think they had come around before.
False. They or true. Sorry. They first started camping out after the earthquake. They feel like something happened with the
Oh,
environments and pushed
all right.
them further in from like a little island they were on outside of the Golden Gate. So yes, so good. 4 out of 5.
All
I
right.
do want to end before we officially end, asking everybody again for almost entirely selfish reasons. What is your favorite book, TV show, or movie that you've read or seen in the last year?
That I've read or seen in the last year. Um, I would say, well, I think one of my, in the last year, well, I have to say that the latest season of Fargo was pretty good. But I'm, I haven't seen Ripley with Andrew Scott, and that looks
Hmm.
interesting. But I have to say, and this is maybe falls in the guilty pleasure category, there's a show called Repair Shop, and it's on the BBC. And the premise of this show is people bring in things that typically have some meaning for them that are broken in some way. And this repair shop is a barn in the middle of England, in the middle of nowhere, and has all these experts working there that repair different things. It's like a watchmaker who repairs all kinds of intricate things. There's like a guy who does woodworking, a woman who does all the sewing and the fabric stuff. And there's like people that have all these different expertise, but they're like old world, like expertise that just are dead now. And so people bring in these things for them, and sometimes they're famous things. This was my dad's helmet in World War One, and my grandfather's this or that, and a lot of great things come out of that. And these people restore them, like back to not back to new totally, but it also depends on what the owner wants. But it's sort of the idea that this world that we live in now, where everything is kind of disposable, or use it once and throw it out. And how can we sort of revive these things that we have rather than throw them away, especially things that are emblematic and sort of history, of our history and our personal history as well.
Well, I definitely will have to check it out. You made it seem interesting. You were also the first guest to ask what your favorite TV show is that you haven't watched, which was Ripley. So that's a new one. You got to mark that one down. But really appreciate you joining today, Ron. It was great catching up. And thanks for offering your insight into a variety of these topics. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin. Looking forward to more of these out there, and it should be exciting. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron.